The billionaire knelt on damp grass like a defendant, knees staining in mud as two small girls wept over a stone that named his ex-wife and erased him. Camera phones hovered, the red dot of record an unblinking judge, while his bespoke suit clung in the heat like guilt. The girls' faces reflected his cheekbones, his eyes, his lineage, expensive features stamped on tiny frames in thrift store sweaters. He had come to posture as grief, to dispatch closure between hedge fund emails, but humiliation arrived first, barefoot and sobbing, calling his dead ex mommy and looking like him. The cemetery sprinklers hissed like gossip. An old groundskeeper glared, seeing a man who owned skylines but not truth. His chauffeur shaded him with an umbrella. He waved it away, suddenly small. Wealth could hush markets, not graves. What mattered knelt beside him, trembling, proof that riches multiply everything except love. Before the cameras, before the word daddy scraped his pride raw, Jonathan Blake specialized in erasing the inconvenient poor. He priced groceries with algorithms, foreclosed homes with a clause, chased yield across continents like a bloodhound. His boardroom was a glass cliff with views he mistook for vision. Emily, the only human who once spoke to him like a stubborn mirror, had left quietly 5 years ago. He told himself it was incompatibility, not cowardice. The day she died, a junior associate pinged him between mergers with a link to an obituary. He skimmed, shrugged, rescheduled empathy for later. Now the later wore pigtails, red sweaters too warm for summer, and wrists too thin for his conscience. They placed wildflowers at a cheap headstone because budgets bury the poor differently. The marble didn't say wife or widow, only beloved mother. Omission is a scalpel. It cut him clean open.
He recognized the twins the way one recognizes a recurring dream, familiar and unbearable. 5 years old, 5 years absent. Numbers that mocked his quarterly religion. The world, so obedient to his wire transfers, suddenly spoke in childhood math he'd never learned. He counted their breaths, their flinches when a crow cawed, the tiny way their shoulders leaned toward each other to make a fortress of two. He reached for words and found only ledgers, so silence confessed for him. A janitor in neon overalls shuffled past with a bucket of chlorinated grief, eyeing the billionaire like a billboard that promised rain in a drought. Jonathan's pen could buy patents, islands, elections. It could not sign a receipt for lost time. Humiliation swelled, not public, private, cellular, the kind that reddens the ear and dampens the backbone. The headstone refused to blink. Love had filed its audit. Heat peeled the varnish off his composure. He had prepared a statement for the dead, efficient, euphemistic, the kind of goodbye you can fit between a jet's wheels touching down and wheels up again. The girl's identical gazes shattered it. He'd believed in meritocracy because it smelled like him, cologne and confidence. Yet merit could not explain why two children in clearance sneakers bore his bone structure while growing up under ceiling stains. He imagined Emily, alone in a rented kitchen, splitting cheap pancakes into perfect halves, rationing medicine, rationing hope, rationing pride so thoroughly she mailed none to him. He pictured baby teeth he never saw, fevers he never held, a first day of preschool where a teacher asked, "Father?" and silence filled the form. The cemetery breeze threaded through the oaks like a whisper of reprimand. Wealth wasn't a safety net. It was a blindfold.
He fled ritualized mourning and drove aimlessly until neon diner light lacquered the windshield. Inside, chrome reflected his failure from 9 angles. The girls ate grilled cheese with famine etiquette, chewing fast, eyes tracking exits the way poverty trains you to do. He watched condiments sweat on formica and named each unspent birthday in his head. The waitress refilled water with a pity that stung. His untouched coffee cooled like an indictment. He measured the bill against his portfolio and felt nauseous at the ratio, pennies against a fortune, yet this receipt recorded the first true investment of his life. He noted the quiet rules of the newly fathered, napkins folded into courage, straws unwrapped with trembling thumbs, ketchup drawn into smiley faces like ceasefires. In the stainless napkin dispenser, his reflection looked like a man who overbuilt the castle and forgot the drawbridge. The poor keep time differently, by bus schedules, coupon expirations, the day the landlord's knuckles learn your door. He had kept time by earnings calls and embargoes. Now he tracked the diner clock's sluggish hand as if it were a pulse. The girls' thrifted sweaters clung, but not as tightly as fear. They ate like they were racing something invisible, the way children do when scarcity teaches velocity. He learned, in those minutes, that silence can be currency if spent with care. He learned that asking too much, too soon, is luxury arrogance. Outside, his black car glistened like an apology nobody ordered. Inside, mustard and sunlight pooled in equal accusation. He decided, not in a speech, but in a small nod you'd miss, unless you were starving, to reroute everything. His board could handle a quake, his life couldn't. He would stay, he would earn the second minute.
Neighborhood gravity pulled them to Diane's modest house, where paint blistered near the porch light and courage held the rest together. Inside, linoleum softened under footsteps the way grace sometimes does when it has been stepped on too often. Children's drawings bloom best where rent is late. The fridge was a museum of resilience. Diane's eyes were the soft authority of people who become governments when the world abdicates. She handed him Emily's letter the way one hands over a newborn, fragile, consequential, heavier than it looked. His name in her handwriting threaded years into a single knot. He read confession in loops, regret in margins, love in every unsent stamp. The last line gutted him. Love them, even if you don't forgive me. The rich forgive themselves with spa packages. The poor request mercy with paper and a borrowed pen. He folded the letter like a vow. That night he slept on a creaky twin mattress that sang every time remorse turned in his ribs. Birds tuned the morning like budget violins. He woke to the smell of pancakes without saffron, butter without pedigree, coffee you drink because warmth outranks taste. Diane moved through the kitchen with the competence of unthanked systems, stoves that never stop, hands that never clock out. He sat useless at the table, a man who negotiated sovereign debt learning how to pour syrup without flooding the plate. Money makes most things theoretical. Fatherhood makes everything tactile. He felt the slick, the stick, the fragile architecture of a morning that could fall apart if he missed time to smile. The girls entered, hair messy, grief tidied into small talk. He discovered that humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of someone else before your stock opens.
Routines assembled like scaffolding. He canceled meetings with the kind of ruthlessness usually reserved for buying bankrupt factories. He booked a suite with a kitchenette, 2 small bedrooms, and sunlight that didn't care who paid for it. He learned the choreography of buckles and booster seats, the sacrament of snack time, the theology of animated films that smuggle wisdom beneath giggles. Sophie drifted toward him like a dandelion seed, looking for a patient breathe. Sarah hung back, sentinel, discarding smiles like counterfeit bills until she could verify their mint. He instituted a policy of small invitations and larger silences. Performance bonuses don't apply to trust. He found himself on the floor, building towers from blocks and from apologies, discovering both collapse if the foundation is air. Power used to be signatures, now it was presence. He could sign nothing into existence. He could show up. Law arrived, as it always does, sometimes late, always hungry. The caseworker wore a neutral smile that had seen 1,000 tragedies and learned not to bruise. Clipboards sterilize pain, but they record it too. He answered questions that scalded, discovered a new courage in admitting ignorance without caveats. The girls offered their own exhibit, a drawing of 3 figures and a roof with a heart. Art can be testimony when language is underage. After she left, he trembled in the bathroom where the mirror had no advice. Somewhere on a trading floor, a junior analyst mispriced a risk because the rain was too loud. He didn't care. There are markets that crash without headlines. He began to believe redemption isn't a verdict but a habit. He rehearsed nothing, planned less, and found that improvisation is what happens when love refuses to outsource.
Opposition mailed itself under his door wearing legal letterhead and cologne. Michael Carter, ex-boyfriend, sudden claimant, a man auditioning for ethical custody and strategic leverage. Opportunists orbit grief the way moths orbit porch bulbs. Diane's surprise felt sincere, which made Jonathan's anger more disciplined. Rage is easy, guardianship is paperwork. He called counsel with a voice that sounded strangely like patience. He pictured the girls as an asset some man might collateralize against their mother's memory, and bile rose. The poor get contested like property, the rich contest property like people. He vowed to argue in the only form that mattered: daily steadiness, breakfast on the table, nightmares sat through, tears not fixed but witnessed. Still, the courthouse loomed, fluorescent and indifferent. He slept less, the twins slept less. Even cartoons seemed louder. "Good things," Sarah whispered once, "don't last." He wrote a dissent. The courtroom was beige, a color that pretends to neutrality while hiding 1,000 bias stains. Wooden benches creaked at poverty's familiar weight. He nodded to his lawyer, a quiet blade forged by women who learned to sharpen themselves. Michael wore a suit that fit like ambition, awkward at the shoulders. Testimony stacked, reams and voices, affidavits and memory shards. Jonathan didn't read from paper. Markets reward fluency, children reward sincerity. He told them what he had learned in weeks that money couldn't buy. Which snack soothed which thunder. Why small ducks choke on big bread. How laughter sounds when trust unbuckles the seatbelt. He admitted the marrow-level shame of arriving late to a life you co-authored. Beige listened. Law pretended to be a scale but wanted to be a heart. When recess fell, he stepped outside and let the sky cross-examine him. Judgment returned, a voice with gravel and mercy, granting him custody not as prize, but as assignment. The paper didn't absolve him, it deputized him. He walked into the corridor and wept like ceilings do in public housing, quietly at first, then in a steady leak nobody volunteers to fix. Relief can be heavier than guilt because it requires action. He wiped his face with hands that once sealed deals and now had to braid hair. He drove to Diane's with seriousness clogging his throat. Children sense verdicts before words arrive. Sarah hit him with a hug that canceled years in a second, and then wrote new years he'd have to live into. Sophie asked about home, and the word shifted from real estate to responsibility. He knelt, promised without performance, and watched 2 small souls accept terms money could never draft. He bought a house that traded prestige for sunlight, walking distance for safety, status for a yard where laughter could outbid sirens. The walls wore pastels chosen by fingers sticky with popsicles. He measured success by how quickly the kitchen smelled like pancakes versus how quietly investors accepted his resignation from omnipresence. Wealth had trained him to outsource mess. Fatherhood demanded its center stage. Syrup avalanches, blueberry rollaways, the slapstick sacrament of crawling under tables in a suit to retrieve fruit. He learned the difference between quiet and peace at bedtime. He narrated the same book until the bear finally got it right. Somewhere uptown, a gala unfolded without him. A chair sat empty beneath a chandelier that glittered like a million unmade choices. He turned off a cheap lamp and felt rich for the first time in a language banks don't speak.
He hired a tutor, not a boot camp. He paced transition with the tenderness of a man who once sprinted past everything. The school forms asked again for father, and his handwriting trembled like a confession pressed into ink. He started journaling, not for posterity but for penance, a ledger where deposits were eye contact, and withdrawals were phone checks resisted. Diane visited with the calm of a lighthouse that doesn't care whether ships say thank you. Some nights, the house shuddered under nightmares that arrived uninvited. He sat in hallway darkness, a monarch abdicated, holding court with shadows until fear got bored. In the quiet afterward, he noticed a miracle that looked small. 2 steady breaths synchronizing. Redemption is incremental. A staircase with low risers and infinite landings. He learned to love the landing, the pause, the in-between where fragile bravery grows ankles. Rachel, Emily's sister, called with wildfire. Grief speaks in accusations when it cannot find the dead. He absorbed her blaze and withheld his own. For once, restraint wasn't a tactic, it was homage. He listened to the inventory of injuries Emily curated in nights he didn't attend. He didn't barter apologies for permission. He said the one honest thing that mattered. He was not leaving. The line softened, not into forgiveness, but into a truce with possibility. That evening, he drove the girls to a hill where the city unclenched, and the stars practiced ancient choreographies. They made galaxies from fingertips, futures from breath. He wondered if the dead get good reception, and decided hope is the only signal worth faking. Sarah asked, not with words but with posture, whether he was becoming someone their mother might respect. He lay still beneath the sky's cross-examination, and didn't flinch.
Riches are volume. Poverty is texture. He started noticing textures. The grain of the backyard fence where small hands learn splinters are honest teachers. The scuffed leather of shoes that walk too many errands for too few hours. The way cheap curtains filter morning into a fairer light. He arranged the pantry like a ceasefire, labeling snacks the way treaties label borders. He tallied wins not in millions but in, again, please. He felt humiliation retroactively, like a bruise blooming after impact, each memory of his past arrogance ripening into ache. He called partners and stepped down from boards with the particular gentleness one uses to disarm a trap. They congratulated him as if fatherhood were a promotion. He recognized the insult baked into the compliment. Work had always applauded him for harm disguised as genius. Now he sought a quieter metric, repair disguised as ordinary. Media finally sniffed the scent of story. Billionaire, secret twins, graveyard epiphany. Headlines clattered like dropped silverware. He refused interviews, declined profile pieces attempting to lacquer his shame into redemption content. No transformation arc for clicks, no museum of curated contrition. He issued a single statement through council that named the girls as private citizens and himself as a student. The internet wanted spectacle. He offered a calendar of school pickups and laundry. Paparazzi hovered at the gate and discovered that boredom is a better security system than guards. In the kitchen, he burned pancakes and learned that apology, when served with fruit, is edible. He posted one photo to a private album, 2 socks, mismatched on purpose. He captioned the moment in his journal, not online, choosing unsymmetry with them. The algorithm shrugged and moved on. He remained, algorithm proof, algorithm indifferent, algorithm free.
Money tried to return like an ex, promising convenience, whispering shortcuts. He refused to litigate love with an Amex. He still used resources, but he stopped weaponizing them. He bought quality shoes because feet are small sovereignties. He bought secondhand books because magic doesn't require a receipt. When a boutique offered influencer discounts if he'd let cameras kiss the twins' foreheads, he cut the call short, then cut the relationship. He redirected charitable foundations away from branding and toward bail, shelter, antibiotics, childcare stipends, the undervalued indexes of survival. He learned that philanthropy without proximity is just a nicer mirror. He started showing up at clinics incognito, not to be thanked, but to learn wait time math and underpaid heroics. He thought of Emily in those chairs, counting hours and courage. He carried that count home like homework and completed it with bedtime stories. Sarah guarded her heart with bureaucracy. She audited his smiles, cross-checked his promises against delivery times, filed them under tentative. He admired the rigor. He matched it with transparency. If he'd be late from the grocery line, he said so. If he didn't know how to fix a braid, he admitted ignorance and offered YouTube humility. Trust, she taught him, isn't a fortress. It's a bridge you test with toes before committing weight. He kept his weight cautious. One afternoon, painting watercolors, she slid him a brush and requested a cat. He tried and failed, and they laughed without mercy together. Failure, which once threatened his stock price, now purchased intimacy. Laughter repriced him. That night, he noticed her place her book closer to his on the coffee table, a tiny migration test passing. He logged it silently. Bridges don't celebrate, they hold.
Sophie loved insects the way some kids love crowns. She announced their identities with monarchy zeal and asked nothing back except patience. He kneeled in grass until grass stained wealth out of his knees, learning antennae taxonomy from a professor whose tuition was honeyed cereal. He bought a cheap magnifying glass and realized magnification isn't about making things bigger, it's about making attention honorable. Sometimes Sophie talked in her sleep, worry leaking out like steam from a kettle. He sat up with books and chocolate milk, a novice at the vigil that mothers know by heart. Dawn gilded their exhaustion into camaraderie. He understood why the poor look older. Worry is a mispriced tax, compounded nightly. He vowed to pay it himself where possible. Take the watch, take the listening, take the first alert so childhood could nap safely. Compensation packages should include lullabies. Court orders turned his name into a new noun, father. Paper can't make hearts obey, but it can remove saboteurs from the rails. Michael conceded noisily online, quietly in person, like most men whose outrage needs an audience to stay hydrated. Jonathan didn't celebrate. He reshelved the toothbrushes and returned to routine. He noted how victory feels different when measured against absence. A win cannot resurrect. He kept Emily's photo on a shelf at child height. The girls told stories about her, how she hummed when ironing, how she hid stars in their lunchboxes as foil stickers, how chemo made her bravery bald and she wore it anyway. He listened without intruding his apology into their remembering. He learned to love a woman beyond marriage, beyond failure, as the architect of the two souls now renovating him. He thanked her in the vocabulary of steady mornings.
He revisited his empire like a firefighter assessing what to let burn. Some companies could be reformed. Others were arson wearing suits. He sold a payday lender at a loss and used the loss like soap. He converted an abandoned office into a childcare hub with sliding scale fees and tutors who understood that homework is also hunger. His partners muttered about brand drift. He drifted toward meaning. He set a policy in every surviving firm. No late fees on the poor, no eviction without a human conversation recorded by a third party, no bonuses for cruelty disguised as efficiency. Enforcement is where moral memos go to die. He hired auditors from neighborhoods that feel policy in their rent. He paid them best. He learned that systems insult sincerity by absorbing it. He fought back with stipulations, teeth, and public dashboards. He preferred dashboards to press. Rachel visited finally, bringing her grief in Tupperware cookies, as families do when words mistrust themselves. They sat on the porch where paint peeled like a timeline. She inspected him the way border agents study passports. The girls raced in the yard, yelling rules only children understand. Rachel's posture softened by half-degree increments as the afternoon refused to crack. She found Emily's letter in his pocket, softened further.
Absence had been the original sin. Presence was the daily penance. They didn't hug, but they stopped bracing. That night, Jonathan journaled something he'd never dared. That forgiveness is a migrant, entering on a student visa, overstaying because it found work washing dishes named Today. He wrote that humiliation had been his sponsor. Without it, he'd still live in a penthouse of justifications, ceilings mirrored, guilt decoratively arranged. He turned the page and slept.
Grief refused to follow a syllabus. Some mornings, Sophie held her cereal like it was dangerous water. Some afternoons, Sarah stared at nothing, as if nothing had a secret it might confess. He stopped trying to therapize with aphorisms. He learned the ministry of proximity. Sit, breathe, be. He discovered that the rich overestimate solutions and underestimate company. He kept the house stocked with fruit and tissues. He kept the calendar porous. He created a ritual. Every Sunday, 3 slips of paper into a jar labeled Kept Promises. Each slip a receipt for a small vow honored, a park visit, a bedtime story, a call returned. The jar filled slowly, visibly. Trust likes artifacts. He placed it on a shelf the height of a child's skepticism. He invited them to audit the jar whenever the old fear hissed that good things don't last. Evidence argues softly, persuasively. On the anniversary of the cemetery, he returned, not for spectacle, but for payroll. Griefs, loves, humilities. He brought the girls in a blanket. They cleaned the stone with vinegar and determination. He replaced dead flowers with stubborn ones, the kind that don't mind sun. He spoke quietly to the air, not asking for absolution, but offering quarterly reports. Nightmares reduced, laughter increased, again pleas up 42%, tantrums equalized by hugs. The groundskeeper nodded at him now, a small dividend. A woman nearby sobbed into a scarf that once belonged to someone. He taught the girls to give tissue first, advice second, silence always. On the drive home, they sang a song wrong on purpose, the way joy loves to vandalize correctness. He realized wealth had made him fluent in acquisition and illiterate in gratitude. He practiced thank yous in the rear view until they sounded native. He encountered his old life at a gala he couldn't avoid. Scholarship banquet, long commitment, strings quartets sawing elegance into predictable slices. He wore a suit that felt like nostalgia and a face that felt like work. Donors also wore jewelry called opinions. He declined questions with the poise of a man who finally knows the difference between privacy and secret. A hedge fund rival muttered that love had domesticated him. He smiled, fully feral. On stage, a student spoke about choosing between rent and textbooks, and the room pretended to be surprised. He redirected his speech into a check with clauses. Funds dispersed by community boards, not donors. Meals attached to grants. Counseling built in. Applause hesitated, then complied. He went home early to find 2 socks on the stair, a comet trail directing him to sleeping planets. He didn't frame the event program, he framed the socks. Summer thunder rehearsed its temper. The girls built a pillow citadel and granted him temporary citizenship with a passport stamped by crayons. Power flickered. He lit candles that made the house smell like calmer versions of the world. Lightning tattooed the sky, quick white veins at the window. He held their fear without trying to evict it. Fear, he learned, pays rent when you don't bully it. Storms always flatter the rich with generators. He chose to sit with the dark and explain constellations that only come alive when you've lost the switch. When the lights returned, they cheered as if they'd won the game of Earth. He tucked them in beneath quilts that understood legacy better than titles. He stood in the doorway and admitted a secret to himself. He no longer missed his calendars. He missed the breaths between their breaths when he was late.
The house developed muscle memory.
Coffee at 6, cartoons at 7, school at 8, healing in perpetuity. He folded laundry like treaties, matched socks like negotiations, ironed shirts like apologies held briefly against heat. He watched Sarah's questions mature from fear audits into curiosity bonds, yielding interest no spreadsheet could chart. He watched Sophie's insect empire expand to butterflies, her kingdom granting asylum to every fragile wanderer. He sent photos to Diane of lunchboxes packed with star stickers and fruit cut into hearts that looked clumsy, earnest, and exactly right. He texted Rachel school funding links, then shut up and wrote the checks. He reread Emily's letter on nights humility needed a tutor. He practiced being the man she imagined, no longer a headline, finally a human. Resumes exhaust, rituals restore. His wealth learned manners, his heart learned work, his home learned permanence. Humiliation had been the entry fee, redemption the slow exhibit. He didn't believe in happy endings, only honest continuations. He taught the girls what he'd never taught himself, that worth isn't tallied by applause or assets, but by promises kept when nobody is filming. He let his fortune tilt toward repair, a tide redirected by 2 small moons. When he considered legacy now, he thought of secondhand sweaters warmed into capes, of letters folded into maps, of graves visited not to wallow, but to report progress. The rich and the poor still lived on divided streets. He would spend the rest of his days building crosswalks. He tucked the twins in, kissed foreheads that smelled like shampoo and crayons, and sat in the hallway, that sacred middle place where fathers keep watch. Outside, the city rehearsed its noise. Inside, 3 heartbeats argued gently for tomorrow.